is the what, how, why, and so what section for each log. And in each column is essentially what you're asked to do. The first part is the what section. So in that section, you need to make sure you defined the risk. What is it you're trying to minimize? And where you can, identify whether it's an emotional or physical risk, or cultural risk as well. You also need to talk about why that risk is relevant. What we mean by relevant is how and why is it important to minimize the risk so that the group can function effectively. What is effective functioning of the group? Come on, team. This is... Pardon? Oh, okay, that's part of it. This is 101. We've done this over and over again. We defined effective group function as, what was our goal?
To use leadership skills to minimise risk so everyone feels safe to participate.
Brilliant. Okay, well done, Skylar. So it was to use leadership strategies or skills to minimise risks so that everybody felt safe to participate in all of the activities. So when you're defining the risk, you're talking about what the risk is, whether it's emotional or physical, and why it's relevant. And what I mean by relevant is how and why it's important to minimise it so the group can function effectively. An effective group function is exactly what we just said. If you don't do that, I can't give you 2.7. Simple, because basically that standard requires you to discuss why that risk is relevant to the activity and also why the strategy you're using to minimise it is relevant to minimise it, which we're going on to the next part. How and why. In that section, essentially if you strip it all the way back, all we're asking you to do is define which leadership strategy you used or selected to try and minimise that risk, and also explaining how you did it or describing how you did it and why you thought it was going to minimise that risk. Okay, so that is by explaining why you thought it was going to minimise the risk or why you thought it was a good one to minimise the risk, is explaining why that leadership strategy is relevant to that risk. All right? So we're going to have a look at that in a minute on as an example. And then the so what section is actually what was the actual effect. That's the where you look at you're evaluating the use of that strategy. So you're looking at the positives, negatives, and improvements, and I've put in action and after action or recommendations. So on Friday, I stressed that you have to show me both. You have to show me that somewhere in the camp or before the camp when you were planning, you looked at your leadership strategy and went, it's not quite right, I need to fix it in some way, and then took action to fix it. Right? Now that might not have actually been as successful again, but at least you're reflecting and showing me that you are reflecting and making those adjustments as we go. And then you can also make after action reflections and recommendations. So that might look like, next time if I was to do a similar activity, I would. Okay? And for each of your positives, you need to state the positive or negative of the leadership strategy, give examples of the positive or negative, and explain how that leadership strategy, positive or negative, affected the function of the group. It always needs to come back to the function of the group. Okay? And remember, I start over here, I to we. Always start with I and then move to we. So for example, I was involved in the action planning because I did this. Then from there, we did this. Does that make sense? All right? So that is essentially it in a different way. Is there any part? Okay, cool, stop that there.